Hey everyone, it is Monday, which means it's time for another Bomb in the AM with scoops and the bad, mediocre, maybe okay Thief reviews, and also joined in the UK, Cara Ellison has returned to the show. We are very happy to have
Hello.
you back, Cara.
Yay!
I have
Welcome back, Cara.
returned. I'm really sorry, by the way, for any seagull noises that happen. I'm by the seaside, and it's a little bit seagull infested. So just to apologize for that in advance.
So
Is that
we'll,
is that like kind of like a humble complain brag? Like, I'm sorry, I'm over here hanging out, luxuriating by the ocean. Apologies for all the sounds of the local wildlife.
I don't know. I mean, just out of shot behind. I mean, you can't see them, but there's like a bunch of really hot surfer dudes just around here. They're just like, they're
we'll
not
just
gonna
have to
Poor
say.
take your
thing.
word for it. We'll just
I'm
have to take
so
your word
sorry
for
this is happening to you.
Yeah.
it.
I mean, you're really taking time out of my busy surfer bonding schedule, so yeah.
Well, we'll have, the noises of my dog snoring in the background on my end. We'll have uh, cops and crimes going down on Alex's end,
Yeah, a
and
lot of
then we
sirens.
have and then we have seagulls and maybe the grunts of hot surfer dudes on your end. So we have a
Totally.
full range of background noises to complement us this morning.
A full range, definitely.
So you, Carrie, you have just recently moved to Brighton, as you were telling us just before we started the show, right?
Well, I mean, I've been living in Brighton for a while, but it's sort of a kind of a base for working in London still, which I just finished doing with my last sort of embedded thing, which you can check out. Um, but yeah, basically this month is going to be the last month for me before I go traveling around the world. So I am basically leaving at the end of this month and coming to your fair country for a little while, and then coming back to Berlin to go to a Maze Fest, and then I'll be traveling around after that. So yeah.
Yeah, why don't we try and catch people a little bit up because a lot has happened for you since you were last on the show. You decided to go and use this new service called Patreon,
That's right.
which is something that's kind of up and coming for a lot of critics that have maybe a very specific type of writing they want to do that isn't necessarily always, let's say, traditionally funded through the normal games media. Even on sites like Giant Bomb, and your angle was that you wanted to do embedded games journalism.
That's
So do
right.
you want to talk a little bit about, sort of how you ended up on that, and then I guess how it's been, given that you've actually started doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been something that's been hanging in the back of my mind because I started off reading at the beginning of last year. I started reading a lot of rock journalism just because I was interested in it, and it kind of occurred to me that that kind of thing doesn't really happen. I mean, it doesn't really happen anymore in rock journalism like now, I think, because obviously because of the internet and like how easy it is to do something like this, and people tend to do interviews just online.
Hmm.
But I feel like something is missing when you don't go and see the atmosphere and the environment and the kind of places that people actually work and live in. Something is kind of missing when you don't see that as a journalist. It's very difficult to get an idea of context that someone's working in. So I thought, well, I'd really love to do that sort of thing for games journalism, or particularly indie developers who don't usually get talked about in that manner. And also I was thinking about the lack of games like developers who are figureheads. We don't have very many of those, and people because I know that Ken Levine sort of I guess downsized his team uh, this week, and so that's been around. But like Ken is one of our few sort of figureheads, so I thought it would be really interesting to maybe kind of try and find new interesting people to talk about and their kind of outlook on life. So yeah, so that's what I've sort of put on Patreon, and people can fund it if they think it's a good idea. So yeah.
So you want to become the Lester Bangs of games journalism is what you're looking to do here. You want it to have like an almost famous kind of adventure through the world of game development.
I guess so, but I mean, it's funny because I feel like for a lot of game developers, their lifestyles are slightly less.
Maybe a little bit more low-key.
Around, drug taking and
Sure.
groupies. Although, I mean, maybe some people have groupies. I don't know. I'm not sure. Does Philfish have groupies? I don't know. I have no idea.
I would love to know what Philfish's groupies are like. I bet they're really interesting people.
I bet they are as well. I mean, Phil is actually a really, really interesting person to talk to. I mean, he's so passionate about everything. She's constantly, like, blustering against the storms type of guy. And I really, he's very fun to talk to as a person. So, yeah.
Yeah, everything is 200% speed with Phil. There's always just a million. Yes, yeah. That's definitely a very good way of putting it. So where can people actually read it? Because I know that you actually already filed your first piece, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I did. Let me look up the address for it. You can find it on the address is embedwith.tumblr.com. Just because I thought it would be the easiest thing to do is just set up a Tumblr to just drop all of the text in, so I could just log in and sort of drop it there and then leave it, and it would all be in one place. So just started a Tumblr, and that's where it goes. And you can read my first. It's pretty long, because I wanted to sort of sculpt it into more of a kind of journey, like a travel writing thing. So it's quite long, but I hope it's interesting, and people have been very positive about it. So yeah. You can find it there. And my first sort of focus was George Buckingham, who he's part of the Wild Rumpus group in London, which they run like these kind of these wild sort of game parties where they take like games that are really great to sort of spectate and take part. And games that are a bit of a spectacle to look at, stuff like Mega Gurp or Nidhogg on a big screen, like projected on a wall, and they just put it in a giant bar, and everyone can come along late night and just and they've got DJs, and it's really, really fun. It's kind of like, I guess it's like Baby Castles. Alex, have you ever been to that? I think it's similar.
I managed to get here just in time to miss the whole Baby Castles phenomenon, or at least I got there in the very waning moments of that whole thing. I don't think they have that space anymore, and I think that has mostly they have disbanded primarily as a group. Though I think some of those guys still do stuff under the Baby Castles banner, but it's not quite the thing it used to be.
Oh, that's sad. I didn't know about that.
I could be wrong, but I haven't heard about them doing much in the last couple of years. So,
so when I read through your piece, and some of the things that you talked about that motivated you for wanting to do it was getting context for how these people live. And one of the images that sticks out in my mind, and I hope I'm not hallucinating this, it's definitely possible, but I thought you took a picture of their bathroom, and part of what it stuck out to me is just like when I started to think about what goes into sort of embedded journalism is figuring out those little details, learning about how people live and how they sort of conduct themselves in their sort of off time and when they're not on at an event or something like that. And I wonder from your perspective, how much did you find being a part of that uncomfortable, and how do you find the line between wanting to ask questions and be a part of that and learning some, and then when are the moments to sort of just sit back and just kind of let things play out?
It's really interesting because you asked that, because I think it's very much dependent on time and how much time they have to spare for you. It was actually over the period of a week that I stayed in London, actually in George's house, which I mean isn't unheard of, because me and George are actually, I explicitly say, we're actually quite good friends, and he was one of the first people I met in games when I moved to London a year ago, and but I wanted to just kind of warm up for this sort of thing, and so I thought he would be an ideal candidate because George is very, very quiet, like the sort of person that I don't think anyone would really primarily think of when they thought of someone who's like an iconic game development figure. I hope that's not insulting to George or anything. And so I thought of him, and so I'm already familiar with his house and how he lives, but obviously I didn't know that much about his work, so that was the thing that that really stood out to me. But yeah, you're right, there is a difference between asking questions and interrogating, and also just letting things happen. And I think it's a lot of the best thing about embedded journalism is that you have loads of time to let those things happen and to just hang out and to just something will happen, like in the flat. Like, for example, there was like one day where Alice, who's George's flatmate, came in. She was helping with Wild Rumpus, and she was like, yeah, so I found like 3 more pallets down the street. And I was like, pallets? And she was like, yeah, there are these pallets down the street. We're going to nick them. And I was like, why? What for? And she was like, we're going to make this thing called the Splintercade. And the Splintercade is basically like wooden pallets that are stacked up on each other, and she'll cut them out, like a hole that's like the size of the television they want to put in it, and then they put that in the stack of pallets, and then they have people play a game like looking down on top of it, so it's a kind of top-down thing, and they'll provide people with controllers on the night. So so she basically stole these pallets off the street and was trailing them through the house, and then painting them bright orange, and there was like orange and blue specks of paint everywhere. And I was like, this is the most spectacular piece of games development like I've ever been involved in.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was really great, and like that sort of thing, you know, obviously if you hang around for long enough, that stuff happens, and that's the sort of story you want to tell people.
Well, I think that's interesting, because normally when you do an interview, you know, it's like, hey, here's your slot, and like the weird thing about that is you really quickly have to try and figure out the dynamic of the other person and how that interacts with you, especially if you haven't, you know, conducted an interview with them before, so you don't know what your repertoire is going to be. And like it takes, you know, I have found like, you know, at least 5 minutes to kind of figure out a rhythm in an interview. Like you can go in with sort of a sense of what you want to talk about. You know, when I was younger, I used to go in with like very specific questions, and these days I mostly just a couple minutes before have some bullet points and then just kind of go in and wing it. But you just have such a compressed amount of time to establish a relationship, as much as one can be established with another human being, to try and get something more than just, you know, why is your game so awesome, or, you know, they're just the standard bullet points that they're there to talk about, and it takes time to establish a relationship to get them to deviate from that stuff, and it's much more interesting, or it sounds very interesting in, you know, in the position that you're in, to just sort of like, it's not 30 minutes, like, you know, maybe it's, you know, 3 hours, you know, several times a week, so that if you don't get around to asking something because it's not the right moment, or it doesn't feel like the time to ask it, like you'll have another opportunity for that to happen, which I think is just interesting, sort of on its face.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, I struggle with interviews in the sense that I want to kind of bounce off of the person I'm interviewing a little bit more than just interrogate them. I don't want to shine the light in their eyes and go, tell me all of your secrets, because I find that that's not really kind of conducive to
Do you know interviewers who do that? Because I don't feel like that's a very effective method.
Actually, I feel a bit like, you know, Nathan Grayson, I think, is like a fantastic interviewer. I think Nathan Grayson is one of the best ones that we've got, and he's really good at interviews. But he's got like these kind of, he'll fit in these like, just like, I don't know, he'll have these really, really stinging questions to just like insert just at a moment that they don't expect. And then they're caught off guard, and then they tell him like this thing, and then he's like, really? That's awful. And then so it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, wow, like Nathan can really, like, he can really twist like the questions so that they're in the right place at the right time. And I think he's got a real thing, like, he's really, really good at it. Whereas I tend to be more like trying to make people feel more comfortable, and tend to want to have a more of a chatty kind of thing, and then I choose like the most interesting replies that they gave me. But largely, I mean, I'm so chatty, I tend to just want to talk about like, oh, what kind of music do you like, you know?
Well, these are two different approaches, right? Like a lot of what, you know, you're talking about what Nathan does on RPS. A good example of that recently is, I forget the EA executive he was talking to, but he was in Nathan was in line before the DICE Awards, in which at the DICE Awards they have sort of a red carpet that everyone that I think is nominated walks down, and then you get like there's a media line, and everyone gets like less than 5 minutes. You get like 2 or 3 minutes with each person. And Nathan used the little bit of time he had with this one EA executive who's waiting in line to go to this award ceremony to grill him on, Nathan's word was failure for the launches of Battlefield and some other game. But basically it was setting up that, like, well, why should people have any faith that Titanfall is going to be a good launch as well? Like, and he just skewered him in those couple of minutes, and not in an unfair way. I think in a very fair way, but very much Nathan finds a way to talk about the player's perspective and write about that and ask those questions in a professional manner, but one in which that you can't help but read and go, oh damn, sometimes.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that you realize, like, when you're in proximity to someone, it's much easier to get a read on their personality. It's harder to do over Skype, and because I think human beings have just this innate sense of, like, whether someone's like cool with them or not, that actually happens like in-person chemistry. And I think it's interesting that you say that Nathan has this kind of mannerism, because I've met him a few times now, and we hung out in London actually one time, and in proximity with Nathan, like, he does have that same bluntness in his personality that obviously enables his a really interesting interview technique. And so I think that's definitely something that I think is really cool that you can figure out about developers as well, is like their attitude towards other people and themselves really comes out in their work a lot of the time. So you can figure that out from just being near them and being around them and hanging out. Like, that's actually one of the most interesting things about the Embed project, I think.
Yeah, so people continue to check that out at embedwithin, right? .tumblr.com.
Embedwith.tumblr.com.
Okay, embedwith.tumblr.com.
Not in bed.
That's a different project. That's completely separate.
Totally different. I'll do that next year.
But I'm gonna awkwardly transition to Alex. You have been embedded with Thief.
Yes.
How is Thief?
Before I jump into that, I just want to say in the chat, Cara, apparently Baby Castles is still around, and they have been in the process of looking for a more permanent space. So I was wrong; they are still around in some capacity.
Well, I'm planning on coming to New York, so I will definitely check that out.
You should. On the subject of Thief, as you can see, reviews have been hitting today. Mine will probably hit either late today or early tomorrow before the game launches. I still have to finish the last chapter, but I have definitely come to the conclusion that I do not like Thief one bit at all. It is not a very good stealth game. It is not a very good action game. It's not very good at really any of the things that it tries to do, unfortunately.
Where do you stand on stealth?
I mean, I'm not the biggest stealth player in the world. I certainly do not seek out stealth games generally on my own, but when one is done well, I can certainly appreciate it. I've played the early Thief games. I didn't play the one that came out in 2004, but I played the earlier ones, and I could certainly appreciate those games for what they are. And I think if this game had been more effective at trying to be like those games, then I might have liked it better. But as it is, it tries to combine this notion of you as this master thief running around just stealing everything with this really hokey, awful plot line that seems like it's ripped out of the guidebook from just about every other AAA action game of the last, 5 years. Hey, there's a world-ending conspiracy going on full of, mysticism and bullshit, and it's up to you to discover the truth while also gaining weird special powers from it, and
also, it starts off with a year-long amnesia, right?
Yes, it does.
Oh, that's the best part. That's the best part. Please
throw in
a couple more cliches.
Yeah, it's and then once you wake up and jump back in, honest, there's a mysterious disease that is plaguing the land, and there's even a little bit of the old autocracy being risen up against by the working class, and then also really hammering home the point that, oh, by the way, those guys might be just as bad as the people that were installed before. Original thinking,
Oh no.
Yeah, it's a lot of different things that it tries to throw together, and it does it in a way that's really surprisingly dull. Like, that is my main problem with the game, is that it is just achingly slow and does not and not in a way that it like benefits the kind of sneaking and the thievery. It just feels like every chapter drags for at least 45 minutes longer than it needs to.
It's funny because I always thought the name Garrett was a terrible name for a thief. I mean, if you want to have an exotic thief guy, you don't want to call him Garrett, because Garrett just sounds like, like Garrett who lives next door, like Garrett.
I mean, Garrett is the name of the character from before. So they kept it,
Garrett would be a thief, and then it turns out that's the perfect name for a thief.
I just want a thief to be called something exotic, like Luis, or I don't know, some
Luis,
sort of,
okay,
I don't
right.
know, like a French name, or I don't know, like, or the Wolf, like, Scoops or the Wolf, or the Wolf would be good names.
Okay,
no.
when Alex and I reboot Thief in Game Maker, we'll make sure and keep in mind both of those names.
Also, I think you should rename this like Scoops or the Wolf.
Sure. Yeah, and then they can vote in the chat like, which one do you want today? Wait, you don't want either of us? Well, that's just depressing. Let's just cancel the show.
But yeah, so Thief is not very good. The AI is terrible. Mechanically, like, the act of running around stealing stuff can be really fun. It's just that unfortunately they bury way too much of that in side missions, and not very much of that really gets into the main storyline, which is mostly garbage.
So you say the AI is terrible. What does that mean? Because like the way stealth games or just open world games handle AI is pretty different depending on the game. Like I think for a lot of people, at least for myself, like my last experience with a game of this type is Dishonored, which I thought was an exceptional game, like wonderfully done as both a stealth and an action game. And so I'm curious how Thief handles like its AI. Like is it just there to be an annoying obstacle?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'll give it credit for, is that, like, when you knock a dude out and you leave that body in plain sight somewhere, like, guys who are patrolling will notice that, and they will start frantically searching around for you. So, it's not like they're just oblivious to what's going on. Like, they are able to find you and attack you if you are not careful about hiding in the shadows and, not leaving constant corpses around. That said, even when they find you, they are not necessarily very good at like, getting to you. I had dudes that would just get hung up on objects and just like keep running towards you even though they're hung up on a thing. I had guys who were just staring straight at me, like their icon blazing red, like they know I'm there, they want to hurt me, but as long as I hold still and don't do anything, they won't do anything either. They'll just stand. It's like this weird standoff where neither of us is willing to make a move, and they just keep staring at you. Also, there are really only two enemy types in the entire game. There are guys with swords and there are guys with crossbows, and that's it.
They don't get any magic? They don't get any of the mysticism and bullshit?
No, you are the only one with mystic bullshit. And
of course you are.
Yeah, and
you're the one. You're chosen.
You're special.
Yeah, and I think I understand lots of games do that because they need to try to find a way to explain away all your weird abilities. In this case, the abilities that it gives you are somewhat helpful, but don't necessarily justify the wholesale crappiness of the plot and just the story they're trying to tell, which is just not that interesting. Like, people in the chat just keep saying, "Oh, it's like Dishonored. It's like Dishonored." Yeah, it's like Ursat's Dishonored. It really is what that game is. And that's not really something you should be wanting. I'm sorry, because Dishonored's already there. You can just play that, and it's better. It's better at doing that stuff than this is.
Dishonored's a great game, and speaking of, like, really sweet thief names, like, the main character in Dishonored is called Corvo. That's a badass thief name.
That's a good name.
Yeah. See, they know how to do it. They know how to do it. Harvey Smith's got it down, you know. But, but I was just thinking, like Alex, you were saying there's like that weird standoff with the AI guy. It just really reminds me, if you know where you're walking down the pavement or the sidewalk or whatever, and like you try and go one way, and like the person goes that way, and you're like, oh no, and then you have to step back. Like I just have this kind of weird standoff in the game, just like and
then you stab the guy in the neck.
Yeah, that is humanity's broken AI right there.
So how was the, like, so one thing about stealth games, Alex, is that you try and be stealthy for as long as you can, and then eventually you get caught. I know that in Thief, there's a difficulty slider that turns getting caught into instant death, which would obviously make it, a much different style of approach. But like in Dishonored, one of the amazing things about that game is that it tried to solve that problem of stealth games by giving you a lot of tools when you did get caught. So you could be competent at fighting, which most stealth games just make it so, well, you might as well just quit or die because you failed, you got caught, like move on with your life and do the sequence again. So like what happens in Thief when you inevitably get spotted?
You have one weapon and you can club them, and that's it. You have this like blackjack thing that you like. If a guy is running up on you, you can try and use your bow and arrow if you want, but that's really only a weapon you should be using from a distance. So really, all you have is this one club, which you just kind of flail at them and try and hope they don't block it. So basically, you have a club and you have a dodge, and that's it. That's all you can do. And you just have to keep clubbing them until they get to the point where you can do your finishing move on them. And that is it. And if there are like 2 or 3 dudes surrounding you, congratulations, you either run the fuck away or you're dead. And that is it. That is all you got.
There's like some quick time event I remember that you do during combat a lot, right?
Yeah, so I mean, when you wear a guy down, you have to like press and hold a button to do a finishing move. Or if you have your like crazy focus ability turned on while you're fighting, like once you upgrade it to a certain level, you can then like during combat just press a button, even no matter how far down their health is, and then that will also do a heavy attack on them. But until you get to that point, you're basically just flailing a club in their face until they get knocked down. Yeah, it's not good. It's not ideal.
This is all a big bummer. I hate to say that I told you so, but like I had such a bad experience with this game last E3. I remember telling like you and the other guys when I came back from playing the E3 demo that like I had a 30-minute slot to play it and I could not play more than 10 minutes. Like I was just so bored, could not get into the stealth or the action. Stealth games are bad for game demos, so like I was caveating that in my mind that it's not made for this type of experience that I was having playing with it. But even everything about it was just an instant turn off that I was like, this game has a long road to climb, and it sounds like they polished up what they could, but like one of the things you said is that it's an open world game that has super tight corridors.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't officially call it an open world game because like it gives you a number of different semi-open areas that you can kind of walk around in, but they're all like bookended by load times. So, you can walk around in this courtyard and then you have to go to this other courtyard and there's a door that you have to press a button to get into and then it's a load time. Even sometimes when you just go inside a building, you jam open a door and then suddenly there's a load time. There's no real good flow to it. Like exploring the city isn't really fun. It's just kind of a pain in the ass, and the map is not very good at denoting like it'll tell you where your current objective is, and if you already have a side mission going, you can it'll show you where the objective is for that, but it doesn't really show you like where other things on the map are, like where you can go to get those side missions. Where we're just, like where you're supposed to go to get upgrade abilities. Like there's this woman, the Queen of Beggars, that has this whole area where you go to like give her money and then she upgrades you. And like they don't even really denote that on the map very well. So it's just it's a really surprisingly difficult game to navigate in like the worst ways possible. It's just not fun to explore, and it's too bad because you can see little things in there that are fun. Like when you have all the different arrow types and you're kind of looking at the environments like, okay, I should use the water arrows here to take out the torch so that it's dark and I can sneak around, or I can use the fire arrows to light dudes on fire and create a distraction. Like, that stuff's done okay. Like, it's a good idea. It's just that the game doesn't give you nearly enough opportunities to really be creative with that stuff. Most of it's pretty linear and pretty straightforward as to what you need to do next to progress. And most of it's just kind of annoying and awkward. It's just not comfortably implemented in any way, shape, or form.
It sounds like the actual opposite of Dishonored, because I remember feeling like eventually in Dishonored I almost felt crippled by how many choices I had, how many things I could do. I could do any number of things which involved combat or didn't involve combat, whereas this just sounds like a very frustrating kind of almost just like funneled into something that you're not finding fun, which is kind of sucky.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where, like, they're presenting you like you have choice, like you can try and find your way through the environment without spooking any of the guards or knocking anyone out or doing anything like that, or you can just go. The problem is the game doesn't really allow you to go in guns blazing either. It's like it's trying to kind of balance those two things in a way so that, like, it's leaning more toward the stealth, but it just doesn't, like, it doesn't give you the flow of the combat and the flow of the stealth, like, they don't connect at any point. So it's like you kind of just end up stumbling your way through every environment, hoping dudes don't notice you, and when they do, either running the fuck away or just getting into a dark corner quickly enough so that you can sneak up on them later and just knock them out. It's just like constant rinse repeat of the same situations, no matter how many different ways you try to approach it.
I would just like to take this moment to remind everyone that Dishonored is $30 on Steam right now, and Dishonored is a pretty good game.
Great,
it is.
Yeah.
I really, really liked Dishonored. For whatever reason, Giant Bomb San Francisco, no one could get into Dishonored, and it drove me nuts when that game came out, because I really, really liked that game quite a bit. And both the first DLC is just okay. The second DLC is terrific. I think the Game of the Year edition is $40 right now, but man, yeah, if you have not played Dishonored and you're interested in Thief, like, wink, wink, there's a better game out there for cheaper right now.
Yeah, I would certainly recommend Dishonored over Thief if we were making that choice, but just in general, I would not recommend Thief to most people.
Well, that's too bad. I think a lot of the reason people were trying to give that game the benefit of the doubt was because Human Revolution had a lot of hang-ups while it was in development and didn't have the best first impressions. A lot of people, I think, largely because people, Deus Ex is one of those sort of milestone video games, and so revisiting that is a huge thing to do. And they, I think, in my opinion, pulled it off best they could in Human Revolution, which was a game I enjoyed quite a bit. And it sounds like they weren't able to pull off something similar with Thief. It's not the same team, so it's the same Eidos Montreal, but it's not like the Deus Ex team built Thief. Those were being developed sort of concurrently, it's too bad. We'll have to see what happens. But not that I encourage publishers to have like embargoes that are the day of the game's release, but you have to, in some like weird way, when I abstract my own job, like I have to wonder why publishers have embargoes like this when they must have known the game was going to get beaten over the head. They couldn't have thought that Thief was suddenly going to be this great game when they sent it out to the press, but I don't know. It's a weird thing.
Well, I haven't been reading the other reviews because I don't read other reviews before I write my own, but I've been looking at some of the scores that are popping up, and it seems like it's mostly getting 6s. And, for me, I imagine, yes, 6s in game industry terms is sort of like getting beaten over the head, but it's not like people are saying it's the worst thing ever. I'm probably going to end up being on the lower end of where reviews are for this game because I apparently disliked it a lot more than certain other reviewers did. So, if you're still interested in Thief, by all means, get a range of opinions and see what other people have to say about it. For me, I cannot wait to be done with that game. Like, I'm ready for this last chapter to be over with because the last couple of chapters have been some of the more irritating, frustrating things I've played in a while, and I just want to be done with it.
Well, Cara, you've been... so if you look at your resume, it says that you're a huge fan of bugs. So you normally get all of the bug assignments in games journalism, and I implore people to go and check out your review of the new Earth Defense Force on Eurogamer. It is one of the more unique takes on the Earth Defense Force games. The conclusion, especially, will surprise you if I'm going to use BuzzFeed headlines to tease people to your Earth Defense Force review. But please tell me what you thought of Earth Defense Force as someone that hates bugs. How did you get roped into something like that?
Well, I don't quite know. I mean, Ollie at Eurogamer, I think he just sends me stuff that he thinks I'll get on with, or I think he sends me stuff which he thinks I will be funny about. And so that often means that it will be something in the game that he knows will provoke me in some way. It's like, I don't know, it's like kind of sibling, like, I know maybe she won't get along with this, so I'm going to send her. Yeah, no, it's always fun working for Eurogamer because they have a really good sense of humor about stuff. But the thing about Earth Defense Force is that I was initially going to give it a break because it was really kind of like an awesome thing. Like, no one makes this like, pure shooter thing anymore. Everyone has like, delusions of grandeur. Everyone wants to have this like massive narrative and like be very mature and like very serious. And when they make kind of a shooter game, they want to wrap this like grand thing around it.
There we go.
And I think we're back.
Okay.
I think we're back. So now the structure of this show is now going to have been like there was a video that then crashed, and then you guys kept talking, but the audio kept recording, and then a new video was started, which now has this part. This morning show is all over the map.
It's a hot mess.
It's a real hot mess.
Where did I get? Where on earth did I get to when you dropped? Like, what was I saying?
Well, you and Alex just kept talking. You guys talked about Earth Defense Force. I don't know what happened, but I'm sure you guys had a great conversation.
We did.
Yeah, about 2/3 of your Earth Defense Force discussion was lost on the live stream, but it has been recorded, so it'll be on the podcast and all of that, and the people will get to hear it. But they lost some of your dialogue there.
Well, never mind. Basically, I really loved it, but then I got bored of it. So, I mean, I think it's great. I know, God, I got in trouble because my friend Kieran Gillen reviewed the last one for Eurogamer, and not the last one, but the one that was made by the same developer, and he really, really loved it. He gave it like a 9 or something, and he's right, but also he's wrong. So I got in lots of trouble from him.
You cannot be expected to be beholden to the scores of others. That's not how criticism works. It's not your job to suddenly to just to have his opinion.
Also, like, scores are really, really arbitrary a lot of the time. Anyway, I mean, when you're reading a review, it's really difficult because at parts of the review you might think, oh my gosh, this game is going to get a 9 at the end, and then you read another part of it and you're like, oh, it sounds like it's going to get a much lower score. And then how do you mediate between those two sort of fighting forces in your head, what you're going to give it? So scores are a tricky business. I don't think that everything should be invested in them.
Yeah, like, some people were pointing out in the chat talking about Thief scores where they saw, reviewers tweeting like, hey, you shouldn't play this game. 6.5 out of 10. It's like, wait a minute. Like, don't play this game. That means it's a bad game. Like, that sounds like a lot lower than 6.5. But scores, again, like you said, are super arbitrary, highly personal, and wildly open to interpretation. It's part of the reason I really like Giant Bomb score, because it's just 5 and there are no half stars. It's the simpler you can get the system, the less room there is for like wild reviewer interpretation of what a 6 means or something like that.
I mean, I really like reviewing for Rock Paper Shotgun simply because there's no score, and you're pretty sure that people are going to read all the way through your text because that's all they've got to go on. They can't scroll to the bottom and say, oh, I'm going to buy this because Cara gave it a 10. Like, right. They have to read the text, and that's kind of a really interesting way of negotiating. I think Otaku have a different way, don't they? They have like a kind of should I buy this, yes, no, which is simpler.
It's a yes, no, and not yet.
And not yet, okay, yeah. So it's quite interesting how different places sort of negotiate it. But I do like the 5-star thing. I think The Guardian, when I reviewed The Guardian, they do that star system. So yeah.
I still wish we had a 0-star. That's the only thing I wish we still had. But other than that, I love our system.
I gave right to hell Ride to Hell got like 1 out of 10 or something at Eurogamer.
But that's still 10%. That still means it gets a 10, you know, and that is too high for some games.
Still worth 10% of the price you might pay for it.
So over the weekend I started playing and then intended to stop at some point, but played all the way through the new Strider game, which I think is terrific. I had a ton of fun with that game. I highly recommend it. It's a Metroidvania-esque. It's got some elements of that, although they're kind of the largely optional to find sort of weapon upgrades and things like that. But it's yet again another double helix game that comes from a studio we had sort of written off, and they sort of successfully, I think, rebooted Strider in a way that makes a lot of sense in 2014. The action is a lot of fun. The combat is not very challenging on the normal difficulty, but I have heard on hard it does require you to really think a lot more about how you're spamming that attack button, which was definitely something that Jeff talked about in his review and something I found playing the game on normal, that most of the bosses, with the exception of 1 or 2 towards the end that involve a lot of sort of like bullet hell kind of attack patterns, you mostly just kind of get into a spot and spam on the X button and the guy dies. But there's just there's a fluidity to the motion in Strider that, like, especially later on once you have all the abilities, like your ability to just kind of like navigate an environment just like feels really good, and you can kind of do exactly what you want to do, and when it controls allow you to do that, like there's really no better feeling, just the kind of feeling of flow that you get as you're like kind of scouring through and scampering through an environment. It's a really good game. I really enjoyed it.
I love the idea of flow in games. I love when you feel like you have that flow as well. Like Hotline Miami definitely had it. What else had it? I don't know if you've ever heard of Assault Android Cactus, which is a kind of a top-down bullet hell shooter, which is fantastic. It's made by some Australian devs who used to work for Sega, of course. And that had this kind of like flow as well going on, where when you're shooting stuff and you're moving, it seems like a kind of very fluid motion, and you feel like everything is very responsive to you. So I really, really love that sort of like when you get in the flow of something in a game. It can really basically, it can turn your clock from like 1 p.m. to like 5 p.m. because you feel like you're in that moment, and that's like such a rewarding kind of feeling.
Yeah, and like what happens sometime in Strider is that part of what's great about sort of that like sort of Metroid formula of like stacking mechanics over time is that if you were to give the player all of those at once, you wouldn't use them very well because you just haven't been trained in them. But as they dole them out over time, like for example, you don't start out with a double jump, and then you get a double jump later in the game, and then you get another ability that sort of pauses Strider slowly in midair, and then he kind of gets an arrow that points out, and he can dash in that direction. And so you don't start out with either of those abilities, but once you have those later in the game, and you have a very specific understanding of the physics of the game and what Strider is capable of pulling off, like your ability to jump, then double jump, then dash in directions, like it just allows you to pull off things that if you were to actually plan them out in your head, you wouldn't be able to do. But I know there's actually like a psychological explanation for the ideal of like game flow. I forget exactly where I read about it, but it explains the phenomenon where you sort of disconnect from what you're doing, and you're able to pull off like amazing feats that you can't really explain. It's kind of like when you play like a really hard platformer, and if you're thinking too hard about it, you just can't seem to do the things, and you can't get your fingers to respond, and then there'll be a moment where you just kind of disconnect a little bit from what you're doing or think less about it, and suddenly you're able to pull it off and make it look easy. And there's actually like a psychological explanation for why we're able to do things like that. And I often found myself in that situation in Strider where like I'd think back on how I just took out the room, and if I think about all the inputs that I just did to pull that off, it seems completely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a martial arts metaphor. I mean, I lived in Japan for a little while, and I studied EI, which is the way of the sword, like sword drawing. And it's like a traditional samurai kind of thing where, you get like a real sword, which is actually terrifying in the beginning because you're like, oh my God, I'm going to injure myself. And then you basically, the idea is to draw so that the samurai across from you has their eyes cut open. And then you bring the sword down in their head, and this is like the basic EI move, and then you sit back down like nothing happened, and like and
Can I
it's
just
like
mention how totally badass like your asides generally are? It's like, oh, I lived in Japan for a while, and I sort of learned how to cut a guy's eyes and slice his skull, in like one fluid motion. It was just like a cool thing that I learned how to do. It was chill, whatever.
It's actually in my brain because I'm playing Hakuoki, Memories of the Shinsengumi on 3DS right now, and it's all about this kind of era of Edo Japan, and they mention EI, and I was like, oh, I know how to do that. But yeah, like for me, it's a martial arts metaphor. It's basically like the idea that when you first go into the class, you're seeing people pull off incredibly elaborate moves, moves that are basically they're based upon one basic thing, and then they just kind of expand, and like it's all about learning, I guess, like stacking learning, and basically it just kind of fools you into thinking that it's complex from the outside, but really it's just like taking one basic piece of knowledge and then like extending it and extending it and extending it until you're not only slicing one guy's eyes but like four at the same time. It's nice.
Remind me never to hang out with you when you're near bladed objects. Just throwing that out there.
You know what the funniest thing about because in Japan it's very normal to like wander around with a sword on your back because everyone takes part in like martial arts and kendo and things. And so I had some trouble trying to think about how I was going to get it back to the UK because it is like this giant samurai sword that's used for practice, and it's blunt, but it's still a kind of horrible weapon. And eventually I got no reply from UK Customs, so I was like, is this going to be confiscated when I get this to the UK sort of thing? Because they're not allowed to actually carry around knives that are like longer than 6 inches or something. I don't know. But it's really arbitrary. And eventually I got no reply, so I duct taped it in a box. Like I put it in a box, and I duct taped it to the outside of my suitcase and just slapped a massive thing on it that said "fragile." And it came through in the airport, and I picked it up and left. Just no one said anything, and I was like, "What? This is a ridiculously dangerous weapon." But never mind. I mean, sure, okay.
Yeah, just don't question it. Just go with it. Just put that sword on your back, walk through downtown, and just move. Try and make it a normal thing in Brighton. Just put on the sword and see what happens.
But this is it. I mean, I think there's actually an EI club here or something, but I've never actually gone because I'm really ashamed. I feel like I can't remember how to put my I can't put my hakama on anymore because it's got a very elaborate knot, and I'm ashamed because I don't actually feel like I can remember how to put the knot in. So, yeah, you need to learn how to tie lots of things in martial arts, and it's very difficult.
Wow.
But yeah.
Well, at least now we know why you're so obsessed with ninja names, because you secretly might be a ninja as well.
Wait, if I was ever a ninja, I would definitely not call myself Garrett.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, Garrett's a shitty ninja name, I'll grant you that. I still think it's an okay thief name, but that would be a really crappy ninja name, sure.
Yes.
Well, that mostly, I started playing this, oh man, I'm going to have to, Danganronpa game on Vita. That's how someone said you pronounce it on Twitter. They could just be messing with me, but basically it's this. It comes from the publisher of 999 in VLR, 2 visual novels, and not written by the guy who wrote and designed those, but is supposed to be a mashup of the premise of 999 in VLR, which are called escape room games, and instead this one involves a violent talking teddy bear, and apparently has sequences like Ace Attorney, which I imagine is you interrogating the different folks that you're along with on the journey. I've only played the opening 20 minutes, just long enough to realize that there's occasional like very anime voice acting that my wife in bed she'd kind of just look over as the voice acting would kick in, and then I would just kind of like tab the volume down a little bit more. Like, it's not bad, but like she would just like the head crane would just happen as the voice acting would kick in, and I was like, oh no, I really should have brought headphones in here. And then of course if she used to ask like, what are you playing? I'd be like, a game where people get locked up in a school and a talking teddy bear is killing them, and it's like, oh, even my wife doesn't take what I do for a living seriously. What am I doing here? But I'm looking forward to playing more. It sounds like a pretty interesting game, and everyone that has played it says it has some of the most insane story twists they have seen in a game in a while. So I'll have to report back on some of that really soon. But at least I have started playing it, and it sounds like I might have to pass on Thief. So maybe that's a game I can really dig into this week. Although I think I'll still boot up Thief to get a sense of it on my own, but maybe I won't actually finish it.
When you say that your wife maybe like thinks that it's like so silly that you have this job, I actually went to the U.S. Embassy to get a journalist's visa to come to the States, and on the application you obviously have to put like your job and like what you write about and stuff, and like I gave my form to the lady at the desk in the U.S. Embassy, and she looked up at me and she's like, okay, so what do you write about? And I was like, video games, and she like laughed at me and went, well, I guess someone has to.
That's like, possibly the best response ever. I really enjoy that. Well, I guess someone has to.
Yeah.
It's like both like surprise and an immense amount of condescension in the same sentence.
I had literally. No, go ahead.
I just kind of was like, wow, that, I mean, yes, that person is me. Oh, no.
I had literally the opposite experience when I was trying to get a Chinese visa, because if you work for any media company in the U.S., regardless as your reason for going to China, you have to get a letter from your supervisor explaining why you are going to China and that it is not under media auspices. I did not realize that because the website that they had set up did not explain that very well when I first went in there. And I kept trying to say to the guy, no, I just write about video games. I'm not a journalist. And the guy was like, no, you have to get a letter because we don't want you coming here unless, you are not going to do media coverage. So for him, it didn't matter that I covered video games. You are still a journalist no matter what.
It's really weird because there's such a, there's a really blurred line between blogger, I guess, and journalist.
Sure.
And so it was unclear for a long time whether I should really even attempt to get a journalism visa, because like what I'm doing journalism? I don't feel like it really is. I mean, if it's journalism, it's gonzo journalism, which is again like a completely there's still arguments as to whether that's even journalism because Hunter S. Thompson just wrote about drugs, but yeah. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, I don't know what to do. So eventually, I just decided to it's $180 or whatever to get a visa, and I was like, well, I guess I could use my Patreon fund to actually go towards it. So I should get one and be official, but it's weird. But yeah, anyway, I felt like that was an amazing, actual sort of, I don't know, maybe a backhanded compliment. I don't know.
Well, weird.
Weird show.
We should start winding this down. Some folks have dropped some links in the chat. The two sort of pieces of big news this morning, or I guess afternoon for Cara. There's a slight price drop for the Xbox One in the UK, and they're also bundling a free copy of Titanfall with certain bundles. So it's actually a pretty significant price drop, I guess, if you take into account the digital copy of Titanfall that comes with it. There does not seem to be... the Titanfall bundle will cost the same amount as the Xbox One system typically does in North America, $500. So that bundle is coming, and I guess the game, I guess a $60 free $60 game, but it's not coming with a price drop as well as it is in the UK, at least not yet. But it makes sense that Microsoft would be going all in on Titanfall. It's kind of their big punch this spring, especially given that they're at least in the UK being outsold, I think 2-1 with the PS4.
It really makes sense for them to do this. It's a very, it's not necessarily a smart move, but it's definitely the right move, because I think Titanfall is a good game. I played it. It's good. It's fun. It's better than Call of Duty, I would say. It flows. It's got a lot of interest going on. It's not just shooting. It's like flow and pathways between buildings, and your Titans are essentially like really interesting to play around with, to mess around with. My favorite thing ever was Keza McDonald, who's my friend, who's she's a contributor to IGN now. She used to be the editor, and she was playing around, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I was like sitting there like, la la la, this is just another one of those shooty games. And then she called Titan, and it came down, and there was a guy who was like running from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, and the Titan came like right down on the top of him and went wham. It was just the funniest moment. I just couldn't stop laughing. I was like, this is excellent. I want to play more of this. So it is actually very good.
That was the exact same thing that sold me on that game, because it was like my second match, and some dude did that, and I was just like, if you're gonna fucking Wile E. Coyote a dude with a mech instead of an anvil, that is a game that I want to play for a good long time.
I mean, it's really good when you've got a game that's sort of under the auspices of being kind of serious and mature, and then it's got these kind of playful elements that actually make it kind of worth paying attention to. That's the sort of thing that Titanfall is, I think. It kind of knows extremely well what it wants to do, and like it gives you a lot of there are different ways you can even swing into your Titan, and it's such a pleasurable thing to actually take part in. So yeah, I really like it. So it's kind of a wise move, considering I think that journalists are very, very positive about it in general, for Microsoft to sort of maximize on that. So
much so that I'm now starting to see pieces popping up on smaller sites saying, here's why the journalists are lying to you about Titanfall. It's not the game they all say it is.
Yeah, so, it's really weird. I mean, I feel like there's this like all-encompassing feeling like journalists are like in a conspiracy or something. It's like, well, we do kind of have to go to events with each other, but if you ever get journalists in one place, there's going to be a massive argument, and you don't want to be there when it happens. We all like disagree so much, and so it's kind of surprising to me that there's been such a huge consensus over Titanfall, because I thought it was going to be divisive, because I didn't want to play it before I actually did. So yeah, I don't think they advertise it very well, really.
I think the divisiveness will come from the longevity of it, like how many people want to stick with it long term versus people who burn out after a couple of months. But I think everyone just seems to be in universal agreement that conceptually it's great, and certainly in the short dose that the beta was offering, it was a hell of a lot of fun.
I guess it's always a test, isn't it, as to whether something becomes an esport. That's the test now, isn't it, for longevity? If it's good enough to get a community around it and like that will support esports, then it's going to be one of those things. I wonder if that's going to go that way with Titanfall.
On a long enough timeline, everything becomes an esport eventually.
Yes, that's true, because Twitch Pokemon.
Oh God, that whole thing.
What an amazing thing that was. If you haven't seen, I know that Patricia Hernandez in particular wrote a fantastic summing up of what happened with Twitch Plays Pokemon. It was one of the funniest, most silly, I had a massive grin reading about it all the way through, because I was just scrolling through it, and I was like, wow, this is like really adorable and very, very hilarious to think about. So yeah, definitely check her story out, because I had such a good time reading about Twitch doing this terribly disjointed game of Pokemon.
I will definitely do that.
The last piece of news that I want to bring up, it broke this morning. I have to get Alex's thoughts on this because it's so weird. Is that Seth Rogen? Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who are frequent collaborators, worked on Superbad, Pineapple Express, movies like that, have optioned the rights to an upcoming book that I don't think is out yet, called Console Wars: Sega, Nintendo, and the Battle That Defined a Generation. A book that documents the corporate battle from the '90s about Sega does what Nintendo don't, and they're going to write and direct it and potentially star in it.
That's really interesting because of two things. So for when we were making the Charlie Brooker documentary for Channel 4, How Video Games Changed the World, I did a lot of research into, we were going to include Night Trap. And Night Trap was kind of the crux of when there was a lot of controversy around how to rate games in particular. And I remember, I think it was Nintendo having a real go at, who was their rival at that point? Was it Sega? Or?
Yeah, Sega was their main rival.
Yeah, I think so. So basically, I was reading all about this, and Nintendo versus Sega was like a bitter rivalry because Mortal Kombat was really, really, really gory, and Nintendo were like basically having a massive fight in court by just like essentially bitching about like Sega and how terribly violent their games were, because they were trying to sort of palm off all the blame of this onto Sega and in courts, and Sega were trying to do the same thing to Nintendo, so it was equally kind of like everyone was just trying to like, and it's weird because if they'd actually joined up together, they probably could have fought a lot of these court battles much more efficiently, because really it was about them versus the government and like their rating systems ideas and all of this stuff. And it was so interesting reading about it with regards to Night Trap, because Night Trap had this one thing that was, they got in trouble because there's a scene in which a woman is wearing like a negligee or something, and she gets like some sort of like thing inserted into her neck, and it's like kind of scary, and she's been taken hostage. And at the time this was like huge because it was almost like video clips embedded into games, and it started to be like realistic, but if you play it now you're like, wow, this isn't. And so yeah, and it's really interesting like reading about it, because essentially now everyone is so placid because they've got these huge PR constructions around them and so nice to each other. And although there's some playfulness, I think, with Sony versus Microsoft, but it's largely kind of placid and like, oh, we don't want to have a fight. But back then it was like, wow.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how you make that movie, because I don't know exactly what the narrative arc is. Like, does that movie end when the Dreamcast goes away? Like, is that the sort of end game of the whole thing?
I have no idea. Like, that's what I just don't know. Like, when I tweeted about the movie this morning, Chris Plant over on Polygon said that the book has like an insane amount of buzz in like literary circles. Like, it's one of those books that has just a ton of positivity coming out for it before the book has even been released. So maybe there's an angle to it that like just isn't like clear to me right now. Like, not that I don't think that time of video games is. Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, I feel maybe new information has come to light, and they wanted to. I mean, I remember we were going to ask Seth Rogen to be on the program, but he was probably busy or filming something at the time. I don't know the reason he didn't come on, but maybe it was just, like maybe it's just that the book is actually like the person is, do you know who's writing it? I'm not sure.
Seth and Evan, who who write most of the movies that they're involved with, are adapting it. So they're adapting it not only just to make it produced, but they're actually intending to direct it. So it's they see like they have talked about video games in the press, like they are video game guys. So if anyone's going to adapt something like that, they do seem uniquely suited. They're excellent writers and have the right sensibility. It's just I'm trying to imagine the narrative arc, and now it just makes me very interested to read the book to see where they might end up going with that. How do you make that? I mean, I guess like two companies being catty with each other, like is I can see how that turns into sort of like is it a comedy? I don't know. Like I'm just curious to see what it ends up being.
What's the Social Network?
Yeah, maybe it is going to be the Social Network. They're probably going to have to choose some figureheads to center it around, I reckon, because otherwise it's going to be quite like, I mean, it would probably be like an ensemble thing, but it's probably going to take place in like court dramas where people are being nerdy and court. I don't know.
I don't know.
I have a
We'll
homework
We'll
assignment.
have to see. Yeah.
I have a homework
but,
assignment for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want you to pick some of the figureheads from that period and start dreamcasting them for the next show. Cara, if you want to just email your choices over, but I want to know, who would you have play Yamauchi? Who do you want to have play? Who's going to play Howard Lincoln? Who's going to play Peter Moore
Bernie
in that
Stoller,
movie?
I guess, would be from Sega.
Yeah.
You'd have to cast.
Oh, I love Yamauchi. I love him. I love
So give
him.
me some casting choices. We'll read them off on the next show.
Okay.
We will keep that in mind as we bring the show to a close. Cara, we appreciate you surviving the crash, the great video crash of 2014, as halfway through the show. But as always, we appreciate
surfer guys behind, they were fanning me. It was fine.
And people can follow you on Twitter at what, CaraChan1, correct?
That's right.
And embedwith.tumblr.com to follow your continuing adventures in embedded game journalism. And we'll have to see if we can try and connect during GDC, because you're going to be out here for that in Giant Bomb.
Right. I'm around. I think I'm planning on actually staying in San Francisco for a month, so I could probably hook up with the all of Giant Bomb and say hello, and that would be fun. And yeah, see you at GDC. That would be cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, Alex, you got your Thief review coming either later today or
early tomorrow, depending on how long it takes.
After this, I am premiering the first episode of Binding with Scoops. I'm going to start playing Binding of Isaac today as the follow-up to my Spelunky feature.
Nice.
I have not played that game since the Quick Look, like 2+ years ago. I have no idea what to expect. So folks that want to watch me stumble my way through another rogue you can look forward to that well, I'm supposed to do it in like half an hour, and I still need to download Joy to Key and get my gamepad working on that game. So I should probably get to work on that. Make sure and follow Cara's work. We'll have her on again sometime soon, I'm sure. And Alex, I will talk to you on Friday.
Oh.
Ooh.